Well, here's what happened. I had just finished The Out of Towners with Goldie Hawn
Ah,
and Steve
okay.
Martin. I produced that. And I was very close to the team. And of course, we were always, we had a ranch in Aspen and they were in Snowmass.
Hmm.
So I knew the family. And I always had this huge, amazing instinct about Kate. And then when she did Almost Famous, where she was,
Yeah.
12, cast members, I thought, I knew it. I knew this girl has it.
Bad decisions, bad decisions, bad decisions.
Welcome back to the Bad Decisions Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Nathan. My next guest is the definition of a strong female. She is a movie producer. She was an executive at Paramount, working alongside titans like Robert Evans and Sumner Redstone. She was married to Sony Pictures chairman John Peters, who was played by Bradley Cooper in Licorice Pizza. She speaks 7 languages. Not bad for a Dutch, not bad for a Dutch immigrant. Please welcome Christine Peters.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I am an American
I know,
citizen,
I
so
know.
let's start with that.
I just think it's just so impressive.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Scott. I'm so happy to be here because I know how you started this. I've known you for so many years now, and
Thank, thank, thank
congratulations
you. And
on
I'm really
this amazing
glad to have you
podcast.
on here and to go through the chronology of your amazing life and talk about your forthcoming projects, like your book that I love. And we have the clip that we'll show at
Thank
the
you.
end, a little exclusive for Bad Decisions listeners, viewers. So
Okay.
I do want to start at the top, but I want to just do a lead in. So in 2004, you produced the international hit How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, which starred Kate Hudson and Matthew McConaughey, which grossed more than $177 million worldwide and $105 million of that domestic. You shepherded this romantic comedy from the beginnings as a book where you purchased the rights for $10,000. That film to date has brought in nearly $500 million in revenue through theatrical. And
Yeah, do you want to see the book? Do you want
yeah,
to see the
I
original
want
book?
I want the whole story. But
Hold
yeah,
on. Denisa, grab the How to Lose a Guy book, the stick figure
okay.
book. Wait till you see this. Yeah, it was certainly a struggle because they all did not understand my concept when I said I relate to this story, and it was a silly stick figure book that I went to New York on behalf of Paramount to meet with literary agents that had projects available, for screenplay and for movies, and sure enough, little by little, Denisa, they little by little I went through every single one of their lists, and lo and behold, at the very bottom it said How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, and it was a stick figure book, and I said, oh, that's the one I want. And she looked at me like I was crazy. She said, what do you mean that's the one you want? That's a free giveaway for Barnes and Noble for Christmas. It wasn't supposed to be on the list. I said, well, let me see it. So, of course, I looked at every one of these pictures, which I have to show you.
Yeah, of course.
Hold on. Can you bear with me? One sec. I see it. It's right here. Hold on. No, okay, so this is what I got. This is what
Hold on
I
a minute. Let me
looked
see
at.
inside.
And yeah, okay, so here's the inside. Hold on. So the first page this is day one. Day one,
This is the
meet
book
him
you
at a
optioned
party.
for a major motion picture.
Yeah,
You know, if it weren't
yes,
for your
yes,
track
yes.
record, I'd think you were crazy
And
too. You guys, to the people who are
by the way, they really did. They said, Christine, what are you thinking? I said, look, I'm going to write this script. So, so
Mhm.
meet him at a party. Ditch your friends, convince him to go home with you. Have sex, make sure you let him know he's not the first. And after sex, make sure you talk a lot and ask him if you look fat. Day two, name his penis. So this was what I started with, and nobody believed that I could turn this into a movie, and so I started. I was Writers Guild at the time. I was working for Aaron Spelling, and I'd done a lot of writing gigs. And I said, okay, I'm going to take a stab at this. I'm going to put my version of this book. And I was also West Coast editor for Talk Magazine with Tina Brown, so I knew the whole magazine world. So I said, okay, she's going to be in a magazine world. She's going to write an article about how to lose a guy in 10 days. And we're going to find a guy that she's going to try to lose on a bet. And put the script together, and they said, you know what, this
Who's
could
they?
be something.
Who's they? Who are you
And
dealing with
I
at the
said,
time?
well, the studio was Sherry Lansing, John Goldwyn
So
were my
it
two
was your
kind of like,
Paramount era. Okay.
friends. Yes, yes. And of course I went to Bob and I said, Bob, because Bob was always saying, just pull a rabbit out of a hat. And I was like, okay, so we made The Saint, we made The Phantom, we made the, Out of Towners. That was one of the rabbits I pulled out of my hat also because we ran out of material. And I said, okay, I have a project. It's called How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. And he says, are you out of your mind? What are you talking about? I want another Sliver. I want Sharon Stone. I want, indecent exposure. This is not the kind of projects that I want. And I said, well, Bob, just support me in this because I promise you it will be the gift that keeps on giving. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, okay, just do what you have to do and let me know what you're doing. And I said, okay. So, of course, he never supported me in this project. But in the end, he was very happy, of course, because he got his deal renewed for another 3 years. Overhead deal.
Everyone's a Monday morning quarterback, though.
And then, of course,
everybody's right the next day.
Yeah.
And,
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I fought so hard for this project, and yet everybody else, joins in on the rewards. What do they say that in Hollywood has a million is an or a million no is an orphan if it loses money at the box office, but if it is a success, it has a million
100%.
parents. So that's kind of what happened.
All right,
That's
so
what happened here,
You got the script. Will you tell me about let's get into the stars, because you got Matthew McConaughey and Kate Hudson very early. Can you talk about that?
Well, here's what happened. I had just finished The Out of Towners with Goldie Hawn and Steve Martin. I had produced that. And I was very close to the team, and of course, we were we had a ranch in Aspen, and they were in Snowmass, so I knew the family, and I always had this huge, amazing instinct about Kate. And then when she did Almost Famous, where she was 12, cast members, I thought, I knew it. I knew this girl has it. And when I went to the studio and I said, I'd really like to go with Kate Hudson, they were like, but she doesn't have any, international star power, for pre-sales. And at which point I said, trust me, I know this girl could do it. She's got the look I want, and she's got the comedic chops, And in comedy, you want to make sure that your two leads, because no one in comedy really can carry a movie on their own, unless you're like, Steve Martin, or even Steve needs sidekicks. But in this case, I said, if I can surround her with fun, girlfriends, I believe that they can all bounce, comedy off each other. And then at the end of the day, the comedy becomes a reaction to someone else's line. And we were very excited, and now we needed the guy. So I convinced the studio that we're going to go with Kate. And then I said to Kate, and this is how I feel best to cast, is once you get your leading lady, because my movies are female-based, female audience, who do you want to work with? Who do you feel comfortable with? Who do you feel you could have a good relationship, kind of chemistry with? And she immediately said Matthew McConaughey. I said, wow, I love him. And we met with Matthew, and, of course, Matthew and Kate had a really nice relationship. They were both in other relationships. It wasn't, there wasn't any, how we got it on screen to look like they were madly in love. But the minute we said cut, they both run into each other's boyfriends or girlfriends' arms. And yeah, so they were really good together. And so we went with Matthew and Kate, obviously, and started shooting in New York. I got, again, the financing was not in the studio, what still wasn't ready to finance, and I was able to find my financing from a foreign financier in Germany who was running a big tax fund. And I sent him the script and I said, please, tell me what you think of this because I really would love to, talk to you about financing. He called me the next day. He said, I didn't sleep all night. I laughed through the whole entire script. And what do you need? I said, 35 million. He said, done. That's how I got it
Unbelievable.
financed. So, yeah, so I walked into Sherry and said, we're good to go. And of course, we did our budgets according to what we could afford. And that was not to shoot in the US. It was going to be shooting in Canada because we had bigger deals there. We did 10 days exteriors in New York. And the first day on set, I'm with Donald Petrie, our director. And we're doing our lighting, and it's the first day Matthew drives up on the motorcycle. I don't know if you remember that scene, but the two girls are going to go try to get the Diamond Campaign, the two Judys, and he drives up on the motorcycle. And before that we shot it, he came up to me and he said, "Can I have a word with you?" My director says, "Hey, you're the producer. I'm out of here. Your fleeting man wants to talk to you. I don't want to deal. Just deal with it." So I was like, oh God, now what? First day of shooting, what are we going to deal with? What is the problem? And he says, I just want to ask you if it's okay. Would you mind if I keep my Texas accent? Because I had written it as a Staten Island blue collar worker. And he said, if I have to worry about my accent, I'm not going to be what you want me to be. And I know you want me to be charming. And I said, is that it? He goes, yeah, everything else is fine. I said, done. We're moving the family from Texas 10 years ago to the Staten Island. And that worked perfectly because he never had to worry about his accent because that was so Matthew and that is his natural, fun,
Yeah, one
character.
really sweet thing you told
So,
me is that back then and still to this day, he's a good Texas boy and he calls you Miss Peters. Is that?
yeah, I know he did. I said, no, Matthew, please just call me Christine. He said, well, I'm from Texas and we respect women and this is how I was raised, And I said, please just call me Christine. So yeah, he's such a sweetheart. So great with wonderful manners and obviously, raised with a very
Yeah.
strong mom
All right, so
he was very
now
close
let's
with
roll
still.
back to first gear if
Yeah.
we could and talk about life in the Netherlands. I think you said your dad was a General Motors executive.
Yeah, my dad was overseas, General Motors overseas. So we traveled to many, many countries, like within a year and a half. So I went to about 22 schools all over the world. And from Denmark to Sweden to Finland to Germany to Austria to South America, and New York and London and the Netherlands, which is where my family is based. My mom's family, where my mom is Dutch, and then when I went to school, I went to school in Utrecht, which is where the universities are. That's kind of I guess, what you compare that Massachusetts maybe to the United States. After that, I went to to the Academy of Royal Art, Koninklijke Kunstacademie. I don't know Royal the Royal Academy of Arts, I believe. And then after that, I went to London to study business, and that's where I got recruited by an American company because when they found out that I spoke 7 languages fluently, they said, we need help with our foreign sales. Do you think you could sell to the European market? I said, absolutely. So my first gig was to go to Cannes to take the library and sell as much as I could. It was a really bad library, okay, I gotta tell you. It was like, oh God. But I sold it and everyone was like, well, how did you do this? And I went, well, I think it's just because I understand the culture. Not only do I speak the language, but I understood the culture because I've lived in the countries. And listen, when you're a kid traveling around the world, the first thing you want to do is learn the language because you want to make friends. Not everybody speaks English. So that was kind of my motivation to why I was able to, master the languages. And little by little, I was selling this library and they were like, wow, how are you doing this? And I said, well, because, I know what the Scandinavians want. I know what the the French, Germans, and the Italians want, and I know what the Saudis want, which is always action movies, and I know what China, which was at that time just starting to get into the film business, wanted action also, because when it's action, you don't need to understand the language. You can just watch. It becomes like it's just a fun ride. Whereas if you're doing a drama and if you're doing anything that's very dialogue heavy, it doesn't sell in the foreign countries as well, because I mean, if you can dub it, of course. But although I did very well with How to Lose a Guy globally, which was great. But I supervised all the dubbing on it because I just knew I knew how I wanted the language, and so I worked with all the dubbing actresses to get it
That's
the
so
way I
cool.
needed or I wanted it to
That
be.
is a rare set of qualifications.
Thank you.
So
Yeah, I
so
never.
that's how
Who
you
knew,
made your
right?
bones initially. So then what happened next?
Yeah. And then I met John and Peter Cooper and John, and they were just starting to start a company at Warner Brothers,
Sure.
which was called Goober
How did you
Peters.
meet them?
And they saw I met them. How did I meet them? I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't know,
Yeah.
but mutual friends, I believe. And we started working together on their projects. And of course, again, I was able to guide them into what was going to sell to what territories. And so we did a lot. We did Gorillas in the Mist. Of course, you know how much I love animals. So that was one of my favorites because I was very, very much about the
Yeah.
gorillas in the Congo and, this crazy Diane Fossey that got murdered. And, it was a crazy story. So
Didn't you
I got that made.
yeah, Rain Man?
We
Didn't
did
you
Rain Man.
develop Batman, Witches of
Gorillas,
Eastwick? Yeah.
Batman. Yeah. Yeah. Witches of Eastwick. Of course,
Love.
I love that
So
because
good.
the women love that story. And so we just, rolled out like, God, back to back, I'd say probably 10 to 15 projects. And at which point after Batman, the Japanese were wanting to get into the film business. Don't forget they're huge in electronics. And they approached us to go into to create a studio, and they asked if they, obviously Peter and John, who were like the top producers at the time, rolling out hit after hit. And of course Batman being like the unicorn that stood out for everyone, to join and to create a Sony Studios. So that became the next project, which was building that studio, and which I joined them. I had a overhead deal at Sony, but at which point there was, it was like a lot of action and movies that I really wanted to go a little bit more into, like the more fun movies that speak to me a little more. So then I was offered a position to come to Paramount with Robert Evans and join him as his partner. And then I left Sony, went to Paramount, and we started with Sliver, and then we did Jade, and then we did The Phantom, we did The Saint. These were all projects that Bob had, kind of acquired rights to over the years that needed that extra push. So I came in and packaged and got all these, got them written. Some of them were just books, like The Saint was just a stack of books. So we created the story. And then Bob said, "Hey, we're out of material. What do you want to do next?" He said, "Pull a rabbit out of the hat." So I went into the library at Paramount, and I found that he had made The Out of Towners. And I said, "Hey, Bob, this will work today. A lot of kids, a lot of empty nest syndrome, kids going off to college. It's not, we can redo this, modern day." And he said, "Okay, go ahead." So that's how I got in with Goldie and Steve Martin. And
Mm.
then we shot The Out of Towners. And next thing was out of material again. And then along came
The
this
stick
crazy
figure book.
story.
I can't believe it. Like, to you people listening on Spotify and Apple Music, I'm not exaggerating. This is literally a book of line drawings and stick figures of people and like child level drawings of cars. And which Christine chose of all the scripts and all the books in the world, she chose this to make a movie, which grossed $177 million. So good instincts. I'm sure the most surprised person was
Yeah.
probably the author of that book.
Oh God, these were two girls that were working at a music company that after a hangover decided, late night, and they had major hangovers. They were having their breakfast the next morning, and they said, "Do you know what? We're doing everything that a guy to lose a guy." And then one girl said, "Hey, let's do a stick figure book." And they're lovely girls, Michelle and Jeannie, who we've become very close friends with. And little by little, we started that's why I called the two
Yeah.
girls Michelle and Jeannie. Kate's two best friends. I said, okay, I'm
Oh,
gonna name
nice.
them after you girls. But yeah, so it was an evolve. We just evolved slowly into this, project, and had a great time making it, and I think that the energy that we had in production, I think, came on screen. You could see everyone was just very happy with the project, which I'm doing my next one now, which is called How to Get It All, and that's going to be based on the same cake, little different frosting, but the same cake
And
of
tell
How
me
to
what
Lose a
you
Guy
broke
in
up a
10
little.
Days.
What's the title called?
So, How
Oh,
to
wait, you're
Get
breaking up
It
again.
All.
Can you hear me? Yeah, you're a little
Are you
spotty, but
there?
try again. What's the title again?
Okay, How to
Okay.
Get It All. And, oh, we're reconnecting, I see.
I don't see that. Yeah, it says it's
Is it
recording here. I
working?
think we're good.
Oh, okay. It says reconnecting. So, all right. So it's How to Get It All, which is, I wrote the book. It's coming out in about another week. And I wrote the script. And it's kind of the same, like slice of cake. Girl gets dumped and ends up finding a new job when she can't get any work, and ends up becoming the new queen of green because she gets into the cannabis business and creates CBD products for all the women, and becomes the number one success in the business, and of course tricks the boyfriend into financing her deal. So it's kind of a fun female revenge story that I just acquired
Uh-oh.
financing for. I have
Rock?
great partners. They do all the debt and mezzanine financing. We're making it in Mississippi,
Yeah, well, she
and
said it kept
because
saying
we're getting
reconnecting. I hope she's
Mississippi
on
is kind of a
Wi-Fi.
great state to
I would
shoot
think
in
she
these
is,
days
but because
because
she's in her
there's amazing
house.
tax
But
incentives,
I don't know why her
and
connection is so
they've shot
crap
three
because her
back-to-back
audio is
movies there,
spotty
so
at my
they're
end.
they have it
I would
kind of pretty
imagine you
much
too, right?
wired, and they're just wonderful partners, and we're just moving forward. We're in casting right now, so super excited about it.
So, we glossed over Robert Evans, but we can't just gloss
Right.
over Robert Evans. I mean, this
No,
man
you can't.
who I knew not as well
Oh,
as you, but I knew him pretty well. But this is the man, folks at home. This is the man who won Best Picture for Chinatown, won Best Picture for Godfather, won Best Picture for Godfather 2. His book, Kid Stays in the Picture, is one of the best autobiographies ever made. In
right
and it's
here. See
what
it?
and it's yeah, and it's an even better audiobook than mine. So
And guess what he says in here? Do you know what he said, which is the biggest compliment I ever had? Met a sensational lady, romance, finance. Best down partner I've had since making flicks. Christine Peters is her name. Right there.
uh,
It's on page 419.
that's so
That
great. So
is, this man taught me everything. He was the best mentor anybody could ask for.
start at the beginning with him.
Oh, that beginning is I met Bob when I was in foreign distribution, and he was one of the producers that noticed my work. Noticed that I was selling this library, and he said to me, I see you got some talent, kid. And I said, well, thank you. He said, look, anything you need, I want to help you. So every time when I was in either Mayfed or Cannes or any of the foreign sales festivals, he would always reach out and ask me if I needed help, and he'd send me clients. He'd say, "Oh, I've got a guy that wants to buy, Norway." I said, "Great." He said, "Just give him 7 years theatrical, non-theatrical, and throw in the military." And I did, and I sold it. And he was like, "Wow, this is amazing." So he really loved watching me kind of grow in the business. And which is why I think once he saw that I had kind of, in his words, cut my teeth, so to speak, with Warner Brothers and Sony, that's when he invited me to come and partner with him at Paramount. And
Well, that's great
and we did
because
very well together.
yeah, well, to be as beautiful as you are, and we know Bob
Oh,
loved
thank you.
women, you are obviously a very special business person for him to leave that alone.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Never once. He was so respectful. He was wonderful. He was like, he really, taught me so much and was incredibly supportive in even so far as to let me make How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, which he thought was like ridiculous, but he even gave me a shot doing that.
He had such
So yeah.
grace, I met him not long after I moved to LA, and I was like, so I'd already read the book, and I was already wowed by this guy, and I knew who he was, and I don't know who a lot of show folk are, and I end up at Woodland at the house going to movie nights pretty frequently, and it's like
Yeah,
crazy to a
right.
Midwestern kid. I'm like, the lights come, I come in late, the lights come up, Jack Nicholson's there. It was bananas to a Chicago kid,
Yes.
but he was always
Warren
great.
Beatty was there all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, he was so gracious. And I remember the first movie I ever saw at his house was Adrian Lyne's remake of Lolita. So
Okay.
so Bob says to me, he goes, "All right, since you're the new kid, you're under the microscope. What do you know about the story of Lolita?" And I said, I read the book by Nabokov and I saw the Stanley Kubrick movie, but I have a question. And he goes, "What's the question?" And I said, "I get remaking movies that weren't good the first time, but remaking Stanley Kubrick seems high risk. Why would you remake a perfect movie?" And Evans starts cackling like a child, and I'm like, "What's so funny, Bob?" He goes, "This is Adrian Lyne. He's the director." And I'm like, "Oh, fuck." So I'm sitting there the whole movie watching it, just going, "Please think of something nice to say, because this is gonna suck." And it didn't suck. It was actually really good. And Jeremy Irons was amazing, and Dominique Swain was amazing. But then at the end, Adrian Lyne says, "So, what did you think of the film?" And I said again, like I was really good, but why did you want to make it? And he goes, "Well, there were a lot of things that were done back in the 50s and 60s that just you couldn't that happened in the book that you just couldn't put in a movie." And I go, I know, but this movie was the same as the original movie." He goes, "Yeah, the studio screwed us on this one too and wouldn't let us use any of that stuff either."
Oh my goodness. Well,
But
yeah. I mean,
I like
Adrian's super talented.
Yeah, I liked Bob, and then randomly I was going to New York for like a week just to show my photography portfolio around, and I needed a cheap, free place to stay. So Evans's nephew said I could stay at his dad's place. So I show up at
Oh,
it,
Charlie. Yeah, Charlie. Yeah.
I show up at Charles Evans's, triplex penthouse, his mansion in the sky on Park Avenue. And I walk in,
Right.
and I don't know who's going to be there, who's not going to be there. Who comes walking down the stairs? Bob Evans in white sweatpants, no shirt, with like a vodka and tonic in his hand. And he's like, "Kid, what are you doing here?" And I'm like, "I'm your roommate for a week." And he's like, "Great, we'll have breakfast."
He was such an amazing man. Oh my God. And he was really treated so terribly by the
Yeah.
studio the last couple of years,
Tell me about his instincts as a producer.
He just was, we really worked more on the projects that he had actually acquired rights to at the time that I joined him. So his instincts were, that he needed to get these projects made. The studio was like really in the red at that time on him,
Yeah.
on his overhead deal,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
he hadn't been producing as fast as he needed to. And so Stanley Jaffe was actually the one who asked me if I would please, who was also very supportive of me joining Bob, to please help get these projects made. So there was a stack of scripts, and books in the corner of the office, and it was like, just get these things made, get them packaged, and get them written properly. So that was the first thing I did. So it was really more at that time with Bob. It was more of of getting him back on track, if that makes any sense. Because he came out of the Cotton Club, which was a nightmare that he went
Nightmare.
through with that, the
Murders.
Cotton Club murders and everything. That was a crazy time. And he was in New York, and he just, and then of course, thank God for Bob Shapiro, who came along and got him off that trial. And I was with Bob when he was called to do the OJ trial, to take over OJ.
Oh my God.
And yeah, and I said we were at Huey Lewis and the News at a concert at the House of Blues, and you remember those little red flip phone, the first flip phones.
Sure.
So he goes, oh, my phone's ringing, and it was so loud, and he said, what do you think? He's, oh my God, he says Howard Weitzman. And because it shows up the name on there, and I said, oh, I tell you what, he's calling to tell you that he wants you to take over OJ. Obviously, OJ must have confessed to him or something. He couldn't go further on representing him. He said, what do you think? I said, you're going to be the most famous attorney in the world. Take it. He goes, okay, I'll see you at 8:30 in the morning.
That's
Done.
amazing. I never knew this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we were, because obviously Shapiro was such a, huge fan and friend of Bob's, that he kind of was in the inner circle. And of course, we all became very good friends because of it, with his wife Linnell and everybody, So yeah, that was our little, inner circle. I'm surprised you didn't see him at the screenings, because he was always there
No, I never saw him there, but a
at the screening room.
colorful mix of people.
Yeah. Yeah, we used to go to the Palm. That was his favorite. The old Palm
And Santa
on
Monica.
Santa Monica. Yeah. And so he would
I
always
love it.
say, okay, we're going, after the studio, he'd say, come on, we're going to have dinner at the Palm. And I was literally always so like shy, because I would go in, I'd walk into the Palm with Warren Beatty on one arm and Bob Evans on the other arm, because I was like one of the guys. And we'd
Yeah.
walk in, we'd get a table, and the whole room would go quiet. I'd hear forks drop on the floor. And Bob had his own little booth there with his picture painted above the booth. And we would sit there, have our dinner, and Bob would go, okay, let's go back and watch a movie. And of course, then we'd go back to the house, and then boom, there would be like 15 people waiting to see the movie. And because, he did for his screening in his wonderful screening room, which
And he
unfortunately burned down.
burned down, but what a
Yeah, I
vibe! But
know.
what a vibe that place was.
Wasn't it amazing? I know.
The
I know.
Toulouse-Lautrec painting and the catering
Yes.
and the old school
Yes.
butler English.
Yeah, Alan.
Yeah,
Yes.
Alan, right?
I
And then
know.
and Josh was there occasionally. His son, who's a sweet guy.
Yes. Yes. Josh, I think, lives now in Palm Springs.
Okay. Yeah, but I
But
was just
yeah.
like, I'm like new to town, and I'm like, this guy's having a movie party. He's got like caviar out. I'm like, this is rad.
And smoked salmon. That was his favorite.
Yep.
Yeah, he loved his smoked salmon.
All right,
Yeah.
sorry, continue.
No, I was going to say, and then one day I'm at work at the studio, and I'm getting ready to have dinner with my children, my two daughters, at Mr. Chow's. So I'm packing up my briefcase and I'm getting ready to leave, and I get a call from Bob. He goes, what are you doing? I said, I'm getting ready to leave because I'm heading over to Chow's to meet the girls for dinner. He said,
Mhm.
no, you're not. He said, you're coming to the Palm. I said, okay, all right. Why am I coming to the Palm? He said, because there's someone here I want you to meet. That's very important. We've got to get our deal renewed. And I said, okay, well, who is it? He said, you'll see when you get here. So I get in the car, I drive to the Palm. I walk in, and sitting there is Sumner Redstone and his wife Phyllis and Bob in his booth. I knew you were waiting for me to get to this, so I figured I'd help you out.
Thanks. So
So at the
it
end of
was
the
my
day,
very next question. So go ahead.
I knew it. See, I'm psychic.
Yeah.
So I walk in, and there I sit down, and he says, this is Sumner Redstone, this is Phyllis Redstone. I go, how do you do? He says, Christine Peters, my partner. We are, Christine, will you tell them, please, what our slate looks like? And so I went through the whole slate, and then I said, and then we have this, I just purchased this book, called How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. And Sumner looks at me and he goes, what? I said, no, it's going to be good. Trust me, it's going to be good. So we sit down, and I said, I can't really stay too long because I have to meet my daughters for dinner at Mr. Chow's. But I'm glad to meet you, and, hopefully I'll see you again soon. And congratulations on the studio, and super excited to be working with you. And he goes, you're not going anywhere. You're going to sit down and have a steak. And I went, oh, he calls the waiter, goes, get her a steak right now. And he and Phyllis are sitting there eating these steaks, and the blood's coming out. They're all rare. And I'm like, ooh, I don't really like meat. So I'm basically sitting there, and he goes, and get it, and make sure it's rare. I'm thinking, oh God, I have to eat a rare steak now because
Yeah.
this,
You have to eat a cow.
being ordered. Yeah. And I'm like, okay. So lo and behold, I end up doing the best I can to pretend I was eating the steak. And I said, okay, I have to leave. And then Summer says, yeah, but we're having dinner tomorrow night. And I went, okay. And that became the next day, the next day, the next day, to where he became my next mentor. And I have to say, amazing. I learned so much from him. And, he would always, whenever I'd say, I don't understand why this isn't working out, he'd go, never give up. Never give up. Patience is a virtue of which I have none that you need to learn to have. And, and always stay the course. So there are so many things he taught me that really helped me to keep going and, believe in my vision and not give up. So he was a wonderful mentor as well, and then of course the last part got crazy, but I had nothing to do with that. That's all on the rest of the gang, and you know who they are, so I don't need to talk about
I do know who they are. Yes, I do.
that.
And we'll save that for a never time.
No kidding. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That
So
was so crazy.
so tell me some of the, he was such a titan of industry and such a tough son of a bitch. Tell me a couple of the lessons you learned from Sumner M. Redstone.
Well, I told you I learned, always to stay the course, and that's something I tell myself every day.
Mm-hmm.
To be patient, something else that I tell myself every day, because that is very hard to do sometimes, especially in this business. And, there's so many people make so many promises, and, you always end up basically, either letting them go, but staying in the game, or walking away, which I think most people do. They walk away, but the question is to have the strength to stay in the game and keep going and to not give up your vision.
Yeah.
Listen, I how to get it all. I wrote in 2019, and of course was ready to go with it, and of course COVID hit, so everything got stopped. So basically, and my God, I just kept going and going, and kept attaching as much talent as I could, from Snoop Dogg to directors, and I did a few rewrites, and then little by little, and then bingo, I got the most fabulous finance team behind me, and am now making the movie. But had I given up back then, I wouldn't be here today. So these are the things that he taught me, um, which I felt were very valuable, and they're easy to say, but they're hard to do. Let's face it.
Yeah, I once read that the definition of Buddhahood is continuing in the face of a situation anyone else would have thought impossible to change.
Yeah, this is true. It's true,
Soldiering
and that is
on.
yes, yes. And, keep the vision and you can't let go of it. You have to keep that vision. Have to see it finished. And, the first start is to see it finished, and then every other pieces are just building towards that finish line. And I think that's what helps to keep, projects online and to keep yourself, as a producer, which is the hardest part of it all, by the way. I think they're the most undervalued people because, the stars take all the glamour and,
Yeah.
and costume designers, and yet the producer, without a producer, you have no movie, and it's crazy how so few people really understand that, I mean, I've run into people that say, what does a producer do? And I'm like, and they think that we lay around in pools drinking Mai Tais or something.
Well, the thing is, some
We
of
raise
them
the money,
do.
we write the script, huh?
So, some of them do that, and that's the real problem. Is there are people who get producerial credits who get nothing. And I have a friend, I'm not going to name him right here, but he's very funny, and he's a real producer like you are. And so he was making a deal with a big movie star, and he just said, or sorry, with a big writer, and he said, yeah, so he's going to need a production credit too. And my friend says, "Oh, no, no, no problem. I'm going to need a writing credit." And he goes, "What?" And the agent was like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Well, he's like, but you didn't write any of it." And I'm like, "And he's not producing any of it, so that's how it's going to work, okay?" So I get a writing,
Yeah.
I get a writing credit. Are you cool with that? The guy's like, "No, I'm not cool with that." He goes, "Well, then I guess I'm not cool with giving your screenwriter a producing credit."
Well, that happens all the time. When I did the first draft of How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, they told me I couldn't take a writing credit because I was WGA at the time. And they said, we'll give you producing credit, but we're not giving you a writing credit. And so I said, okay, fine, I'll give up WGA. So, it's always a negotiation, how many credits you can get, how, what kind of payments you're going to get, on the back end. So yeah, it's just never ends, those negotiations. But, and the ones I have now I just love my guys, because they're so about getting independent films back into the theaters. And they're all ex-studio guys like myself, so we all know that model. And the great part of it is we all know how to take that model into the independent world and recycle it back into the model that we've already established. So this gives us the ability to use tax incentives from other states, to be able to, like I did with, for instance, How to Lose a Guy with, a shot in Toronto. It gives you the ability to still create the movie, the vision that you want, but you're getting tax incentives from other states. And
Right.
these guys are so good at it. They come out of Bear Stearns, JP Morgan, studios. So we all have a wonderful synergy right now because we all understand that model and we know how to take that model and put it into the independent world. And then we know how to recycle it back into the box office. So I'm very excited about this new model, and I think this is going to be the future. Um, I think that, the reason I do rom-coms, I'm writing a whole series of books on the how-to about how to get it all, how to steal the deal and get the guy, how to steal the runway. So all these books are coming out back to back. I have scripts with all of them, so we can start to create our own momentum in the IPs and just start to kind of roll out, movies that people want to go to the theater. You want to have a date night. Girls want to put on their heels and in a cute dress and go out with a guy. They don't want to sit at home on a couch watching Netflix all day long, eating pizza.
Yeah,
Come
what do you
on.
think? What do you think the horizon looks like between, the waning box office and the hyper competitiveness of streamers and how AI is going to play into both? What do you think the future looks like?
Well, those are three different things. Let's
Yep.
start with streamers.
Okay.
I'm going to make a broad statement here. I don't see streamers lasting. I think they got very lucky during COVID. And everyone, it was Netflix. I look at Netflix as what I call the unicorn at the time. They were going down that freeway at 120 miles and everybody was trying to catch up with them.
Yeah, they were first.
Unfortunately, They already had their foot in the door, and unfortunately, the studios were very short-sighted in that period because what they saw, they all just wanted to catch up, and you can never catch up with a unicorn. They were so far ahead, and they were buying all of what I call the studios that were throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They were buying up all the IP that the studios had spent millions of dollars creating and selling them for pennies on the dollar to Netflix.
Yeah.
So their content was insane. So for everybody who walked in their house eating pizza on a couch, they were able to watch basically studio produced quality movies on Netflix
For $10 a month then. Yeah.
for nothing, yeah, or $9.99 or whatever. And so basically that was the deal of the century. So every studio wanted to catch up. All of a
Hmm.
sudden it was Disney, and it was Hulu, then it was Max, and then it was Paramount Plus, which we won't talk about. Um, But all these people, you know what I'm saying? All these people were just fucking jumping on, the dump trucks, trying to catch up to the Ferrari. That would never happen. And I was always so frustrated thinking, why are you throwing all your good stuff out when this will end. This will not last forever. And sure enough, now they're left with nothing, and now they're left with trying to scurry back into like the old models of the Marvels and the this and the that, because they lost 4 years of development. They lost 4 years of developing stars. We were always able to develop stars because we were doing like 6 to 7 movies a year.
Yeah.
And we would do, like, say, deal with Billy Zane on Titanic, and then I made a deal with him because we do a 2-picture deal. We made a deal with him on Phantom. So we would continuously build talent and recycle, not recycle, I mean that in a good way, but build them, to the next level. And we lost that period during COVID. So, all the stars just kind of like said, okay, I'll do it for less and I'll make a movie for this, for Netflix or Amazon. But they could never catch up, and they never would. And I call it the FOMO theory. I don't know if you're
Yeah.
familiar, but it's kind of the NFT world of fear of missing out. And
Yeah.
instead of fear of missing out, nobody really had a clear vision of the future. So now we're back to where are we at today. Okay, so if you look at box office, this particular last 4 year, holiday season. Do you know what kept our box office alive this holiday season?
No.
You don't. Okay. Let me tell you. Mufasa, Moana 2, Wild Robot, Sonic the Hedgehog, and Wicked. Brought our
Animation,
box
children,
office
family.
all animation. Because why animation? Well, what you're selling in animation is you're selling a family movie. You're selling 4 to 5 to 6 tickets a shot. Because every mom and dad and kid and brother and sister or, family member or girlfriend and boyfriend, they all go in droves. So what you're giving is a fun moment, of social moment of people to sit together, have some popcorn, have an event to go to, have something to go to after, maybe you go for dinner or, whatever. You have like an outing. So my theory is to focus on the family slash social movies that create the box office in droves. For every girl that buys a ticket for a rom-com buys a ticket for her friend, the ex-boyfriend, the future boyfriend, the ex-girlfriend, the mom, and the dad. Because she wants to share that. Girls are emotional. They want to share emotions with people. And
Agreed.
so I feel you create emotional films, that are funny, that you relate to, and, that you go like, oh my God, that was me. Oh my God, I did that. Oh my God, you get to have popcorn watching someone else go through what you thank God are not going through, or you might have gone through and wish to God you didn't. So it's a relatable, emotional movie. And in animation, you're creating a wonderful experience for families and for kids with great messages. So, and we're not going to talk about Snow White. That was a disaster.
I
And I don't want to
heard.
go through all that, but oh my
Yeah.
God. Oh my God. Oh
So
my God.
back to the other thing. I mean, is there a path to saving streaming? Like if some giant juggernaut came in and just bought them all up and made just one giant one, would that work? Because I know people are saying, "Oh, I got so many streamers now. It's costing more than it did when I had DirecTV paying $130 a month."
Exactly. And when are people going to realize this? They're just throwing money away.
Yeah, people are
Not
never going to
only
go back
that,
to paying what they used to pay for less convenience.
no. And then if you're thinking about, okay, so now you've got all these streamers, you're paying $9.99 or not with or without ads, whatever your deal
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
Why? And you're probably not even watching any of them because there's so much junk on there. I mean, it takes an hour just to find something half decent to watch. And we
Totally.
don't all have a ton of time to sit around and look at like bad movies. Who
No, you
cares?
want you want two
So
hours of my time, and it better be amazing.
exactly, and yes, I'll pay $20 for a ticket for that to go out with a friend and have a share a fun
But
meal
yeah,
or
but that's a
some
tribal
popcorn and a
event.
laugh.
Yeah, that's friends
Yeah.
like us being tribal, being human, and connecting and having
Yes,
a
yes.
conversation afterward, which you don't get with the Netflix and chill.
Exactly, and I just think that that's coming back. And I think now it's time to start creating, fun movies to go to the theater and share with your friends and family. And that is what brought me to Jasmine, the animated project that I'm working on right now, which is, I think a family, it's a fresh new idea. It hasn't been done before because that's the other thing. When it's coming to animation, it's recycling, recycling, recycling.
Yeah.
I mean, Disney recycles everything they have. There's nothing new there, that you can go like, oh, let's go see how much fun. Now you're always comparing it to the last one, be it Little Mermaid, be it Cinderella, be it Beauty and the Beast. I mean, you're always comparing it to the last one. Whereas something fresh, you're getting a fresh new idea and a fresh new story. So I think animation is another direction. I think rom-coms is the date movies for the under 25 females. And I'm not saying that only 20 under 25 females, but as a studio producer, we're taught to only deal with 4 quadrants. One quadrant is under 25 female, over 25 females, under 25 males, over 25 males.
Right.
So Mission, Top Gun is going to be under 25 males and over 25 males. That's going to drive that box office. What we're driving here is under 25 females and over 25 females. Now, it doesn't mean they don't drag the guys in, but if you have a 4 quadrant movie, that's called a hit. If you can get all 4 quadrants.
I never heard that expression
But
before. That's brilliant.
yeah, so,
So,
that's kind of how you have to gauge your content, to what is your demographic, because so many people come to me with projects and they say, oh, will you produce this for us? And I'm going like, who is going to pay to see this movie? Have you ever thought about that? No. Well, go back and think about who your audience is. Because until you know your audience, and thank God I have also the background in foreign sales, I know what countries are going to buy my product. I know what my demographic's going to look like because I have to appeal to that demographic. That's what's going to get you in. That's what's going to get them in the theaters. But nobody thinks like that. They just think, oh, we have a great movie. Let's make it happen. And where does it go? Nowhere. Oh, we'll sell it to Amazon or to Netflix. But there's no real thought behind the structure of the how you're going to get your demographic to go see that movie and how you're appealing to that demographic.
okay, now
So,
since I've been around since the inception of the concept, can we get into Jasmine the Coyote Pup?
yes, yes, there she is.
This is Christine's new book, and it's amazing, and it's going to be a big film or series or whatever
I'm
it is.
so excited about this one. I really am because it's
It's
a
a
true
true
story.
story. Tell the story.
Yeah, I know. And it's so touching to me because this little 4-month-old watch coyote that obviously got abandoned by the family because the alphas are very fast. They probably got chased off by pellet guns or dogs or God knows what. And this little one couldn't make it. So she kind of came to me for help. And I happen to love animals. So when a little coyote starts following me, I go, come, come, come. You come. You okay? You okay? So she felt, I guess, good energy, and she came follow me to my home, and I gave her a little bit of water and kibble, and next thing I know, she made her little nest up the top of the hill and became kind of an outdoor, dog pet because comes what I call her, and she was the sweetest little thing. But I put up all these cameras in my house, and the cameras picked up all the action that was going on in the middle of the night because they're nocturnal, and I'm not sitting up till 3 in the morning.
Yes, and
So I
you would
literally,
send me all these videos all the time, and it blew my mind.
yeah, and I would go like, and then next thing I know, she has this little, like, these little a raccoon mom and her 4 babies showed up because they needed water. They live between concrete and grass, these poor animals. We've taken all their land. They have no place to really live. And so they're kind of like desperate, looking for food. And so this little raccoon and babies came, and she started teaching her kids how to forage and how to protect them from predators. Next thing I know, the raccoons and Jasmine are playing together on the street. Now I'm going, no one's going to believe this. Thank God I have it on video.
It's incredible.
Next thing I know, comes 2 little skunks, and this was springtime, so there are all the babies looking, to learn how to survive. 2 little skunks show up. Next thing I know, there they are all playing. And now the raccoons and the skunks are all sharing a little bit of the kibble, all drinking together. So I put out some toys, and Jasmine takes the ball, goes up to the top of the hill, and it rolls down, and they're all chasing this ball. Okay, I'm going like, no one's going to believe this. So I felt so compelled to write this story about these beautiful little animals that everyone hates. They're pests, they're villains, they're, ooh, we don't want them, but hey, you're living on their land. So, find a way to coexist with them.
Yeah, don't leave your puppy outside all night,
Don't leave your puppy out. Don't let your cat out at night. Just be, like respect the lay of the land.
Yeah, we're sharing
the rules
this
of the
place.
land.
We're
Yeah,
sharing this
exactly.
place, and they were there first. I agree with you.
Exactly. And, every time I see another house go up, boy, then less land for them to live on. And,
Yep.
it's just sad. But at the end of the day, I just decided from that point I was now going to write the animated story, which is Jasmine's journey through the Hollywood Hills with her wild friends. And that book's coming out in about another 2 weeks. I'm working on the illustrations right now. And I went ahead and did a proof of concept, of the idea of all these like rogue animals that don't belong here, that have been urbanized and have no place to go, to all decide they join together to find a place to live happily. And they, of course, go through all the Hollywood Hills. They go through, they go down Sunset, then they end up on Laurel Canyon by the country store, listening to the mamas and the papas, and they go past the Hollywood Bowl, and then they end up at the Hollywood sign, and they go down Hollywood Boulevard. So I just have a whole little fun story of Hollywood from the animal's point of view.
Okay, so we have an exclusive clip from Jasmine the Coyote Pup. Let's roll the clip.
Okay, great. I'd love that.
In the shadow of the city lights, where the stars can barely shine, there is a way.
High above the city of lights and noise, there lived a small coyote pup. She had a jasmine flower stuck to her head from struggling through the brush, looking for her family. So we called her Jasmine.
Where is everyone? Where's my family? Hello? Do you know where my family is?
I don't know where they are, little pup. But you don't have to be alone. You can stay here with me while you look.
Really? Hello? Have you seen my family?
I haven't seen them, but you're welcome to stay with us while you search. These hills may be big, but you're never truly lost with us. Hey kids, you can come out now.
What is this? A little pup wandering the hills all alone?
This is Jasmine. She's lost and looking for her family. Have you seen them?
Be careful out there. It could be dangerous.
Really?
Oh, yes. Humans don't like your kind. They'll shoot at you if they get the chance.
Yeah, and they think of us as pests and trash pandas.
Yeah, and they think we stink.
Yeah, they don't like me either. Although there are some nice people in the hills that do.
In the heart of the Hollywood Hills, Jasmine found the most unusual family. Born not out of blood, but in the wild brush above the city of lights and noise.
Maybe I haven't found my family, but I think I found something just as special.
She is no longer alone.
So, you mentioned Snoop Dogg. Can you talk about that project, or is it too soon?
Too soon. Too soon.
Okay.
But I will come back. And I'd love to talk about it. But we are literally in the middle of casting right now, so I have to keep it quiet.
All right, so we'll put a pin in that one for now. All very exciting stuff, and I want to thank you so much for coming on today. I've wanted you on the show for a year, and I'm glad to finally get you.
I know, and thank you. Thanks for your patience.
Of course.
Remember, patience is a virtue.
Yep, we're real
And
friends.
I wanted to make sure I had really something exciting to talk about, because I had a crazy life, an exciting, wonderful life, and I'm always willing to talk about that. But I also love talking about the future and what we're going to see, in coming up, and the involvement of our business, which I think is coming back now, and very excited to see, new models coming up. So,
exciting stuff. The Bad Decisions podcast was produced by Brock Workman at Herdat Entertainment. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. My book, The Big Book of Bad Decisions, is available for purchase wherever books are sold. A special thanks to today's guest, Christine Peters, for joining me today. I'm your host, Scott Nathan. Thanks for listening.
A Herdat Media Production.